Again, welcome. We will get started in just a moment here. We're going to make sure everyone joins the Zoom program, and then we'll get started. Of course, if you have any technical issues, you can let us know in the chat, and we'll do our best to assist you. All right, I've been given the all clear that everyone has joined. Good morning and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Darling. I am the manager of membership and annual giving here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And welcome to the latest edition of our member-only curator conversation for our annual year-end review of recent collection acquisitions at the VMHC. As always, we'd like to start with a very quick but sincere thank you to you, our members, for your ongoing support. Of course, everything we do here at the museum, including acquiring new collection items, is all possible due to your support of our educational mission. We have a jam-packed program today, so I'm going to be pretty brief with my remarks. We have all of our curators on staff here today. They will do a roundtable discussion of their top picks from the past year that have been added to the collection, and there will be time for Q&A at the end of the program. You can add questions as they come up for you in the Q&A feature of the Zoom, or you can also add them to the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Andy Talkov.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Talkov. I'm the Senior Director for Curatorial Affairs here at the VMHC. And I'm going to just change the slide. There we go. And I'd like to welcome you all here today. Each year the VMHC adds thousands of books and manuscripts, ephemera, maps, objects, all the types of things we collect. It's a very large number, and many of these are received through the generosity of individual donors who are interested in sharing their personal or family stories, along with the nearly 9 million items that we have in our collection. And so it's been a tradition for the last few years that in December, the curatorial team gets together and we like to share with you some of our favorite new acquisitions. So I'm really glad to be joined by my colleagues who will each introduce themselves as we get to them. If you've participated in this program in past years, we're changing it up a little bit today. And we're going to ask for you to participate. So at the end of the program, there will be a brief survey where you can select the item or items that you'd most like to see on display at the VMHC. I can't guarantee they will be on display at the VMHC, but we want your feedback so that we can do some future planning. So be thinking about that as we jump into our first collection. So I don't know how many of you remember or have flown on Piedmont Airlines, but as I was preparing this discussion for today, I ran into an old Piedmont commercial, and they clearly came up with a very catchy slogan, which was "Piedmont is flying you there. I will spare you having to listen to me sing that." But as soon as I heard it, I had this amazing recollection of watching those commercials on television. So today I want to tell you a little bit about a fellow who is strongly connected with Piedmont Airlines. His name is Richard Grayson Stevens, and you can see him at about 16 years old in the photo on the left, and at an older stage in his life in the photo on the right. Stevens was, raised by his paternal grandparents in Pulaski County, Virginia, and attended Edwards Military Institute in Salemburg, North Carolina. And the reason I bring this up is because one of my favorite stories that's been shared by the family about Stevens is that when he was 16 years old, he wanted to join the Army. And so a faculty member at Edwards Military Institute helped him forge the paperwork that allowed him to enlist. And he was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Now, this, of course, is in the middle. This is in 1952. It's in the middle of the Korean War. And at some point, about 9 months into his service, the same faculty member, regretfully turned him in. And so he was discharged and returned to Pulaski County to complete his high school education. But he would not be deterred. So after high school, he joined the Air Force and served as an air traffic controller in Okinawa, Japan. And at the same time, he also received his pilot's license. And so he came back to Virginia after his service in the Air Force and served as an air traffic controller in Norfolk and in Leesburg before joining a private charter airline. And then in 1966, he began working for the Winston-Salem-based Piedmont Airlines. So here's one of a number of Piedmont Airlines planes, the FH-227. This photo was taken about the time that Stevens, started his career with Piedmont. The airline, this is kind of a quaint look at how folks, board an airplane during, one of the periods that's really the golden age of commercial flight. And so Piedmont was started in 1948 and operated routes that served small regional airports and connected those with airports in larger cities. So some of the routes were from like Roanoke to Asheville, North Carolina, or from Winston-Salem to Lynchburg, Virginia, or from Norfolk to Cincinnati. So a lot of Virginia's small regional Virginia airports were served by Piedmont very early in the days of their business. This image here, so in the 1980s, Piedmont started flying, international to London. In the 1960s, they expanded their service to Atlanta and New York, but they didn't stop serving regional airports like the Preston Glen Airport that's shown in this image from about 1981, which is in Lynchburg, Virginia. Now it's called the Lynchburg Regional Airport. In 1984, Piedmont was awarded Airline of the Year by Air Transport World, and each plane was adorned with one of the plaques that you can see at the far right. This is a pretty rare item since even though the fleet had them, they weren't really saved. But Captain Stevens, flew Piedmont until 1985 and remained active in a retired employee group called the Silver Eagles for a number of years after that. Piedmont was ultimately absorbed by US Air in 1989, and it still exists as a brand within American Airlines. But the original Piedmont employees are very close, and the airline is really remembered for its reputation for excellent customer service, for a family atmosphere among its employees, and an exceptional safety record. Now, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture's catalog of airline-related items is fairly small, and we were really excited earlier this year when Captain Stevens's wife, Esma Lee King Stevens, and her daughter, Vivian Lee Solek, who I think are on the call today, donated more than 50 items that they collected that were associated with the history of Piedmont Airlines. It includes some of the items that you see here, so a nice bar of soap that you would have seen. I don't know if everyone on the call remembers the item that's at the lower right, left. That's not a credit card, but it's actually the plate that you would use to run your credit card back in the into the 1980s. A lunch tray with branded plasticware. and tickets and dinnerware and menus. It was just such a lovely representation of all of the work that Piedmont did as they flew around the world and here in Virginia. But I will say that they also donated a number of personal items that were used by Captain Stevens during his career, including a full uniform, a briefcase full of flight manuals that pilots would carry with them, and a number of other personal items. But I have to say that maybe my favorite connection here is that we have they donated Captain Stevens's cap, and in the box in which all of this was sent was this little key. And if you look really carefully toward the loop in the key, it's engraved C Pit, which is for cockpit. And so apparently, we're told that Captain Stevens kept the cockpit key to his airplane in his cap, which is very excellent security. But it was a time before, we lived in a high security era in air travel. And so, interestingly enough, Captain Stevens also participated in the 1970s with the Airline Pilots Association to investigate better security in airports, including metal detectors. So this is really a remarkable collection that not only documents the story of an airline, but the life of a person who loved flying and loved flying for that airline, in a pre-9/11 world. So Piedmont Airlines and Captain Stevens did so much to connect Virginians to the rest of the nation and the world. And we're very glad to have these items and his story as part of our collection. So we're going to move on to my colleague, Karen Sherry, Dr. Karen Sherry, who's going to talk about some paintings we received earlier this year.
Great. Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everyone. Andy, if you would advance the next slide, please. Great. Well, I'm excited to share with you this cache of 6 paintings that we recently acquired that were made by the artist Horace Day. He's pictured on your screen there, doing what he loved, painting out of doors. To give you a little biography about Horace Day, he was actually born in China to American missionary parents. So he grew up in China as part of this missionary family. Because he had showed artistic talents from a young age, as soon as he hit 18, he came to the United States, went to New York City, and enrolled in art school in 1927. After art school, he was regularly painting, traveling around, painting, and showing his works in exhibitions until 1936, when he was hired as the first director of the Gertrude Herbert Institute of Art in Augusta, Georgia. A few years later, in 1941, he joined the faculty of Mary Baldwin College in Stanton, Virginia, and he became co-chair of their art program, a position he held until 1967. So during his 25 plus years in the Stanton area, he developed a great love for the Southern landscapes and the people of the South. And he regularly traveled around depicting both of those things. And you can see that in a painting by Horace Day that's already in our collection, Buffalo Gap, shown on the screen. In 1967, after Day retired from Mary Baldwin, he settled in Alexandria, where he set up a studio and continued painting until his death in 1984. If I could have the next slide, please. So the 3 paintings on the screen, these are 3 of the works by Horace Day that we have brought into the collection. There's 3 portraits all done of people and places around Alexandria where Day had a studio later in his career. Excuse me, sorry, I'm battling a cold, so pardon my scratchy voice. Day was working in Alexandria at a time when the city was undergoing some pretty dramatic changes. There was a longstanding Black community in his neighborhood that was starting to be displaced by various urban renewal projects. And so Alexandria was in a period of transition. Its population was growing and its demographics were changing. Day regularly set up an easel outside his studio. He met Alexandrians walking down the streets, and he would invite them to come into his studio and sit for him. And so the two portraits at the left side of Jack, known as J.C. Chase, and Quinter Allen are two of these Alexandrians that he captured in paint. Day, he was a white artist, but he claimed that his upbringing in China gave him a much more expansive vision of human beauty than was typical of many white artists of this period. He grew up in a foreign culture with different beauty ideals, and he brought that sensibility to his work throughout his career, including his time in Alexandria. And for Day, he particularly loved the not just the people he met in Alexandria, but also the aesthetic challenge of capturing the various tonalities of Black skin. And I think you get a sense both of his love for the people and his craftsmanship in these two portraits. The third work, it's kind of both a portrait and genre scene. It's titled Superfly, Upper King Street, Alexandria. We have not been able to identify the man depicted in this bar scene, but he shows the kind of individuality that that indicates the Day was depicting a particular subject. The title undoubtedly alludes to the famous and recent, at that time, contemporary blaxploitation film Superfly, which was released in 1972. Day likely chose the title to capture the kind of flashy suit and dapper hat that his subject is wearing. Could I have the next slide, please? Another work that we've acquired as part of this cache of 6 paintings by Horace Day is this Alexandria street scene called King Street Discount. This was Day's neighborhood in Alexandria, and he captured it with, excuse me, kind of the bright, lurid colors that come at night, and kind of broad, vibrant brushstrokes that really capture the vitality of this neighborhood outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. Of his impressions of Alexandria on a busy Saturday night, Day said, King Street was throbbing with vitality. Neon signs flashed over crudely painted storefronts, hiding once handsome townhouses whose tall chimneys are silhouetted against the evening sky. This lively combination of old and new, Black and white, seemed to epitomize the atmosphere of a southern town. And could I have the next slide, please? And the final 2 paintings that are part of this new acquisition group are both landscape scenes. One is a marinescape, a seascape, showing the busy harbor in Hampton Roads. And I love how Day's loose brushwork sort of captures the flickering effects of light on water, the constant movement and activity of the Hamptons Road waterways. And then the second painting, Eggleston Cliffs, is a subject that drew Day throughout his career. He regularly returned to this landmark on the New River Valley in Southwest Virginia and painted these cliffs over and over and over again, capturing them in different seasons, at different times of day, under different atmospheric conditions. As this acquisition allows us to represent the diversity of Day's works, it's also really important in filling various gaps in our own collection. Many of you might already be familiar with our landscape paintings from our galleries, Landscapes of Virginia, but we have very few landscapes representing Southwest region and also representing harbor scenes from the Tidewater region. So these landscapes fill those kinds of holes. Similarly, we have a lot of portraits in our collection, but not many portraits from the 1960s, 70s, and also very few portraits of Black Virginians. So we're really delighted to add these paintings into our collection and hope to be able to showcase them in our galleries in the not too distant future. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic, so to speak, to another new acquisition in our department, our curator, Elizabeth Klaczynski.
Hi, thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. So yes, what I'm going to talk about today is an artist for ERA prints. We have 3 prints, if you advance to the next slide, Andy, that we acquired from an organization called Vote Equality, Artists for ERA Collection. These works are part of the Vote Equality's Artists for ERA Collection, and they were featured in the Virginia edition of the Artists for ERA exhibition, which was here on view at the VMHC earlier this year, February 17th through June 4th. The Vote Equality is a grassroots, nonpartisan organization dedicating to making sure that the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA, is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. Vote Equality created the Artists for ERA collection of equality-themed works by contemporary graphic artists to raise awareness about the organization's efforts. The works are also featured on a website, and they have been in exhibitions all across the country. Here, sort of locally, Katie Harnung, a Richard activist, who was also featured in the VMHC's Today's Agents of Change project, is a co-founder and the executive director of Vote Equality. So it's great to have those people here. Hornung, Rachel Scott Everett, and Nico Cathcart, who are all featured in Today's Agents of Change exhibition project, organized the Virginia edition of the Artists for ERA. So we have 3 works here. The first one on the left is called Everybody, Aurora Higgs. It is by an artist named Nico Cathcart, who is a painter and muralist from Toronto originally, but lives here in Richmond. She strives to discuss intersectionality and climate change in her highly colorful, realistic works, which often include sort of local flora and fauna. The artist is also in the process of actually going deaf, and she relies on hearing aids and lip reading to communicate. She often includes birds in her work as a nod to her disability. And the artist statement she provided about this work is the 28th Amendment is not just about women, it's also about all people. It includes queer and trans people of all genders, persons of color, and differently abled people. Our shared community is a unique tapestry which deserves to be protected by our nation's laws. In this painting, nationally known trans activist Aurora Higgs channels the spirit of Marsha P. Johnson while looking forwards and up towards the possibility of a brighter future, one with less fear. And so the one in the middle, the work in the middle, is by an artist named Tracy Ching. She is an artist and self-taught illustrator. Her work translates classic engraving techniques through vector illustration, resulting in the bold cross-hatching style for which she is known. This work was actually made in 2021, and her artist statement says, "I had 2 objectives when creating this modern take on classical American iconography. The first was to revise the personification of Columbia with an homage to the Black women of this nation who had fought tirelessly for equality. The second was to underscore the impetus for the ERA campaign, the pursuit of equal rights for all Americans. And finally, on the right, we have a new era of woman, which is a digital illustration by an artist named Rashi K, who is a multimedia artist working out of Stanton, Virginia, originally from Austin, Texas. She is best known for her gentle depictions of women in various scenes of meditative calm. She uses narrative illustrations and a wide variety of mediums to gently balance the visual scales against the current repetitive cycle of violent images that our communities are exposed to daily. And her artist statement for this piece, A New Era of Woman, was inspired by the cheeky confidence of the women of the Harlem Renaissance, which was in full swing when the first version of the ERA was originally introduced 100 years ago. Along with inheriting our great-grandmothers' fight for equal rights, we also inherited their strength and their ability to appreciate life while standing for what we believe in. We cannot fight every day. Some days we must rest, laugh, and experience joy. So these are all sort of wonderful works, very vibrant, very fresh, a little bit different than some of the other more traditional works of art that we have in our collection. So it's just a great addition to our collection here, and also was wonderful that we could have them on display for at least a few months. So with that being said, I will go ahead and pass off to my colleague. I guess next slide, please. Paige Newman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So next slide, Andy. So the Gay Fathers Coalition of Richmond. Oh, I want to introduce myself. I'm Paige Newman. I focus on manuscripts here. So what I'll be showing are paper-based objects. Actually, this is a t-shirt we received from the Gay Fathers Coalition of Richmond, but my focus is papers. So with that, the Gay Fathers Coalition of Richmond, Virginia, or GFC Richmond, was one of the longest serving LGBTQ+ organizations in the Richmond metropolitan area. Founded in April 1997, GFC Richmond, a nonprofit organization, provided support and information to gay and bisexual men who were fathers, their partners, children, friends, and supporters. Next slide, please. The group was started by 4 men, Bob Green, Bob Rogers, Dave White, and Randy Phelps, who had become friends through a common bond of coming out as gay fathers. With the help of other gay fathers groups in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, these men planned their first meeting. When they arrived at the church where they were hosting the meeting, they had no idea how many men would walk through the door. 7 fathers showed up the first meeting, and the following month there were 11. Bob Rogers, one of the founding members said, after the first meeting, I realized this would be the beginning of building meaningful connections with men that are going through similar challenges and sharing our stories to offer each other support. The main thing we realized was we are not alone. Next slide, please. The group held monthly meetings which served as both social events as well as provide a discussion forum with members and community professionals and organizations. The collection includes founding documents like bylaws and articles of incorporation, annual reports, financial information, meeting minutes, and newsletters or monthly newsletters, which you can see here. The newsletters included messages from the president, minutes from past meetings, treasurer's reports, and upcoming events. As of 2022, Gay Fathers Coalition of Richmond is now the Gay Fathers Community of Richmond, and the information can be found through diversityrichmond.org. This collection joins other collections that we have, including Virginia Gay Lesbian Bisexual Community Center, Richmond Virginia Gay Alliance, Gay Rights Association, and Gay Alliance of Students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Research Assistant Noah Tinsley.
Hello, it's good to be here today. My name is Noah Tinsley. I'm a research assistant here at the VMHC. I've been here for about 2 months, and I'm primarily helping Karen out with an upcoming exhibition that we have on immigration. And that sort of dovetails into the objects I'll be presenting on here. So if we can move to the next slide. All right, so we have two welcome plaques that were displayed on the desk of the Sunday school teacher at Beth Ahaba Synagogue in Richmond, Virginia. They were made by B. David Mullen, who lived 1919 to 2000, for his friend Harris Morton Griff, who lived 1928 to 2016. And I think what's really interesting about these two plaques is they are roughly similar in translation. So on the left, we have, it says Shalom at the top in blue, and then Brukin Habaim, which roughly means welcome to our congregation. And then on beside that, we have a Star of David and the symbol Kai, which is essentially life or a spiritual life before God. And this sort of speaks to the history of Jewish reform in Virginia, because in Europe, Jews oftentimes had to live in their own separate communities, whereas in America, they were able to participate in the wider society. So you start seeing this colloquialism of welcome y'all as being similar to welcome to our congregation. So I think it's a really beautiful sort of duality of the long Hebrew tradition, Brukin Habaim, and then the Southern colloquialism, welcome y'all. And so I think these plaques are a really great addition to our collection because they show the long history of the Beth Ahaba Synagogue, which is one of the oldest synagogues in Virginia, and has roots both in Reform and in more conservative branches of Judaism. And I know we're a bit short on time, so I'll pass it on.
All right, thanks, Noah. And Andy, if I could have the next slide, please. All right, as many of you may have noticed over the past few years, the VMHC is very much becoming a center for folk art, works of art by artists who generally are not academically trained, who often operate outside the typical art market. You may have seen this through the exhibition Visionary Virginians, which is still on view here at the VMHC, and that represents highlights from the collection of William and Anne Oppenheimer, which is part of a promise gift to the VMHC. So because we're becoming a center, we are getting offered more works of folk art. So I'm delighted to show you two recent acquisitions that have been brought into the collection. If I could have the next slide, please. The first is a sculpture by Georgia Blizzard, who was a nationally renowned folk artist and sculptor from the Southwest. She really embraced creating in clay that she gathered from around her home, first in Saltville and later in Glade Spring, Virginia. And she created mostly either squared vessels with sculptural decoration, like the image in the center. She called those arcs. She created decorative plaques, and then she also created vessels, almost vase-like sculptures, as in the example on the right. If I could have the next slide, please. This is the piece that has recently joined the VMHC's collection. It was a gift from the Folk Art Society of America, which just held their annual conference here at the museum in October. And as a gift to us, the Folk Art Society offered us this really beautiful and striking woman pot, as it's called, by Georgia Blizzard. Blizzard created many sculptures depicting the female figure in this kind of ovoid form with bulbous features. And what's really wonderful about Blizzard's work and why she has been so nationally recognized as an artist is the work's ability to kind of embody dualities. They evoke kind of refined and rough, beautiful, grotesque, sublime, and prosaic. And her woman pots, as they were called, they often represent people in her life. We don't know for sure whom this represents, but with the specificity of that long braid down the back of the figure, that kind of suggests a particular individual. So this would be the first work by Georgia Blizzard to enter our collection, and we're really excited to have that. I'm grateful to the Folk Art Society of America. If I could have the next slide, please. And the second work is by a sculptor, John Anderson, who is active in Louisa County. He dropped out of school at a young age, went to vocational school and became a welder. But as he was looking for an outlet for his creativity in his free time, Anderson recalled in the 1970s how I went out into the woods. Times were hard. I prayed to God to let me do something with what I had around me, trees and saws and axes. I started visualizing all these faces and sculptures. So I escaped to my wood sculptures. And you can see a picture of the artist standing in front of his wood sculptures on the left. He also took his welding trade and created works using metal, particularly scrap metal and found metal forms. There's some examples of his metal sculptures on the right. But I'd like to turn to the next slide to showcase the piece that has become part of the VMHC's collection as a gift of Lee and John Payne of Richmond. They acquired this work from the artist when they were living in Louisa and met the artist kind of on the street. This is typical of Anderson's wood sculpture that he carved from a single piece of wood, so a single trunk of a tree trunk. He often started his carving with a chainsaw and then moved to more refined tools. And in this work of a mare and its foal, you can see the kind of rough-hewn shapes and forms that give this a kind of folk art quality and also, I think, a great deal of charm. Yet I hope you can also appreciate from these photographs, we haven't had a chance yet to photograph it in our professional studio, but I think nevertheless, these photos show you how Anderson also kind of manipulated the form to enclose these two horses, a mother and her baby, within a unified shape, which suggests maternal love, protectiveness, nurturing. So it's a really charming piece that we're delighted to bring into our collection to represent contemporary Southern folk art, also themes of horse culture that are very big in Virginia. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague. I think, Paige, you're next.
Yes, thanks, Karen. Dr. Margaret Nolteen's medical notebook. So next slide, Andy. This was a bit of detective story. This donation made its way from New York State down to Richmond, and clearly we knew M. Nolteen was a doctor. If you can see the middle image somewhat clearly. The ledger had name and address, and we found some dates early 1920s, but who was M. Nolteen? From the address, it was clear they obviously lived in Richmond. I did find a piece of stationery in the notebook that also had the same address. So I was like, let's start with the address. So I looked through some of the city directories in our library for 409 East Main Street. And the city directories will focus on, they list residents, streets, and businesses. So I found first an M. Nolteen, and then a couple years later, a Margaret Nolteen, and then eventually a couple years later found Dr. Margaret Nolteen, physician, associated with the address. So bingo. Now we can go from there to figure out what's going on. So Dr. Margaret Nolteen was the youngest of 12 children of Emile and Suzanne Nolteen. Her father moved from Bremen, Germany to Richmond and apprenticed for his uncle, A.W. Nolting, a prominent tobacco exporter. Eventually, Emil opened his own tobacco exporting business and held other commercial and financial positions in Richmond, and was appointed to consul for Belgium in 1852 and served till his death in 1893. Next slide, please. Dr. Nolting attended Westhampton College, now University of Richmond, and the Medical College of Virginia, now Virginia Commonwealth School of Medicine. In June 1922, she became the first woman to graduate in medicine in Virginia. She started as an intern at Sheltering Arms Hospital and served as the medical director from 1924 till her resignation in 1949. In 1923, while working at Sheltering Arms Hospital, she joined a practice with doctors James Henderson Smith and Carrington Williams. Then in 1925, these three joined the staff of the McGuire Clinic and St. Luke's Hospital. And the images, just going through from left to right. Left is our notes from Dr. Nolting discussing the common errors of diagnosis of heart disease. The middle is Dr. McGuire's for, I guess, a clinic at the clinic, but it looked like more notes that she was taking on breast tumors. The third, and there's quite a few pages of patient's diagnosis. And this one it's a female patient with lower back pain due to a fall on the ice. And she lists, obviously, symptoms, what happened, age of the patient, who it is, address in Richmond, and also just, blood pressure, heart rate, and those sorts of things. Next slide, please. So these were some of the enclosures also found in the medical notebook, including pamphlets about diseases of the pancreas and the intestinal pest, tapeworms. Also a patient admission form that's blank for Sheltering Arms Hospital. And Dr. Nolting worked at Sheltering Arms till her retirement in 1963. So from that, I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you, Paige. So my next item is a tiki torch, actually from the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Andy, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. I actually collected the tiki torch myself. I was at the rally on Friday night when the Unite the Right protesters did a torchlit march through the grounds of the University of Virginia, where I was in graduate school at the time in the history department. And then I was also there witnessing the next day, August 12th, in downtown Charlottesville at McIntyre Park. I went because I knew this would be a pretty seminal moment in Virginia and American history. And as a historian, I wanted to witness and document what was happening in my town. And the tiki torch I picked up actually in McIntyre Park after the protest was shut down around the Lee Monument in downtown Charlottesville. Many of the rally participants moved to McIntyre Park. And I found this tiki torch in a pile of other tiki torches there in the park. I was listening to Richard Spencer and David Duke give some pretty hate-filled speeches. It was a very violent and terrifying 2 days. But again, I just wanted to make sure that I had this compulsion to grab things to document it, because I knew, again, this would be a moment in history that was important. And I'm extremely glad that it's actually here at the VMHC for future researchers, for people to see. The tiki torch has kind of become like an iconic symbol object from those 2 days. And I think it really adds to the collection, first of 21st century political history. And and also maybe some events that were not so wonderful here in our Commonwealth, but nonetheless are important to preserve. All right, and then those pictures were some of the images that I actually took from that evening and that day. You can see the torches being used on the top two images, and on the bottom two images were from the protesters in downtown Charlottesville. All right, with that, I will move it along to my next colleague, Andy.
Thanks, Elizabeth. The next collection I want to talk about is fairly remarkable, not only in its scope, but also in the depth of the storytelling that the VMHC will be able to do for generations to come, because of the work of Captain West and his family to preserve their family history. So I think that this this object is significant to me because it's a great example of how what seem like unremarkable objects can have like very significant stories attached to them. So this is a wooden case. The picture doesn't really offer a sense of scale, but I'll say it's about 18 inches wide, about 12 inches deep, and about 8 inches high. But this sort of nondescript wooden box offers us insight into World War II experiences that go from all the way to Germany and Japan, back to a small community here in Virginia. Ultimately Captain Alonzo M. West was born in Southampton County in 1916. He would graduate from Virginia Tech with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration in 1940. And then when he graduated from Virginia Tech, he worked for the Sears and Roebuck Company in Newport News and then in Portsmouth. But the day after the Japanese attacked U.S. forces at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, Mac, his nickname, Mac attempted to volunteer for the U.S. Navy, but was rejected because he had imperfect eyesight. And while he was trying to work through some military bureaucracy, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. So he reported for duty in February 1942. And by the end of his first year of service, he had completed officers training school at Fort Benning and was an officer with the rank of second lieutenant. And he was assigned to the 386th Infantry 97th Division that was then training in Camp Swift, Texas. So in late June 1943, Mac came home on leave, 10 days of leave, from Texas to Zuni, Virginia, which is in Tidewater. And he said that his first order of business when he got home, as was probably true for many people, was to get rations coupons for gas and sugar and bacon. And so this necessitated a trip to the county seat at Cortland. And not wanting to go alone, he decided to ask a couple family friends, Rachel and Geraldine Joyner, to go along with him. They agreed. And Rachel had just completed her second year at what was then known as the Virginia State Teachers College in Farmville, but now this is Longwood University. And Geraldine had just graduated as the valedictorian from Windsor High School in 1943. So they spent the day drinking Coca-Colas at the drugstore. And when they returned, there was some buzzing by the neighbors and friends that, they thought that Mac should, start a relationship with Rachel, the older of the two sisters. So here's Geraldine West, or Geraldine Joyner at the time. This photo taken about 1946. So when Mac gets back to the 97th Division, they move from Texas to California to begin training for amphibious assault operations and deployment in the Pacific Theater. And the following summer, Mac came back to Zuni and attended a picnic at the local church. And he wrote this in his memoir. He said, "For the very first time, I seemed to see how pretty she had become," referring to Geraldine. He said, "No longer was she the skinny kid people called Beanie. She was more like a lovely apparition that opened my eyes for the first time. I think I was falling in love." And during that leave, they spent as much time as they could together, but she had to go back to college in Farmville, and he had to go back to the Army. But on his ride back to training on the train, he recalled that he had a really nice, lovely new future to look forward to when the war came to an end. So German successes in Belgium and Luxembourg during the Battle of the Bulge in December and January of 1945 led to his deployment to Europe, which was very much unexpected for his unit, and they needed to sort of relearn everything because they weren't fighting in the Pacific. And throughout April, he participated in the Allied advance over the Rhine River and across Germany, and they were actually in Czechoslovakia when the war ended in Europe on May 8th, 1945. He came back to Zuni in July of that year, and wrote in his journal, he said, "My eye-opening interest in Geraldine Joyner the previous summer came to fruition on this leave. By the time my leave was up, we had reached an understanding likely to result in marriage when I was released from the Army. After that summer, she was the only girl in my life." So Mac returned briefly to the United States before being deployed to the Pacific Theater, since the war was still going on there. They left California on the USS John Pope. Here's Mac at the far left on deck with some fellow soldiers. But the war in the Pacific ended 4 days after they left. And so when he arrived in Japan in October 1945, his primary job, because his role in the unit was in what was called the service company, which was made up of intelligence officers, transportation, and supply officers. So it was very fitting that he would be put in charge of the demobilization of Japan. And so his title was as salvage officer. You can see here an example of just some of the items that Mac and other members of the service who were demobilizing Japan would find. These are thousands of rifles. So he would take inventories that were supplied by the Japanese and decide whether those items were war material that would be destroyed or whether it would be recommended that they be returned to civilians. So over the course of doing this, he got an inventory for an unknown quantity of silk, and authorized a company to actually distribute some of it to their soldiers. But then he found out that there were soldiers all over that area of Japan asking to send silk home to their families. And he realized that the Japanese hadn't reported huge quantities of silk. This is significant because Mac decided to take some silk, like many other soldiers, and he likely packed it into this box, which was addressed to Ms. Geraldine Joyner in Farmville, Virginia. His return address is in the upper left-hand corner. And in this inset, you can see the Japanese writing. So this was a box that he collected in Japan while doing his work, shipped it back, and the family has kept it all of this time because when Mac was discharged for the Army in March of 1946, he returned home. He and Geraldine were engaged the first weekend of November that year. She had to finish school before she would be married, but the couple married on June 21st, 1947, at a local Baptist church, and her wedding dress was made from the silk that Mac had sent her from Japan. The couple went on to live a lovely life, and the collection was brought to us by Mac's son, David West, and his daughter, Paige Life. It includes 40 letters and 70 photographs and lots of accoutrements and uniforms that Mac used. But what was really significant was the fact that Mac wrote a 250-page unpublished memoir of his time during the war, all the way up to his life in the 1960s. And so it's just a treasure trove of information. And this box was filled not only with gloves and silk, but also with really cherished family memories. And we're very thankful to Paige and David for sharing their family's story with us. Oh, now back to Paige really quickly.
Really quickly. So we have a Edgar Allan Poe pop-up book. There we go. So you can see here. So we just wanted to share this little treat, just to show you the variety of materials in addition to manuscripts and museum objects that are here at the VMHC. This is a rare book. It's a miniature art book with a pop-up title page as seen in the photo of The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And I'll talk about a little more as you can see. Woo! So this was made by Emile Gouzereau. He was a book artist, designer, and illustrator. The text block, which I'll show you here, there we go, was made in 2016, but the binding was created in 2021. So the side I showed you was in English. And this is 2 books in one, and this side is in Russian. And there we go, let's see. There we go. It's called a do-si-do. It's a little over 2.5 inches, all the way square, but just wanted to give you this little holiday treat at the end. So I will pass it back to Elizabeth.
So really quickly, yeah. So now back to the question we asked at the beginning. So which object of the ones that we talked about or the collections that we talked about would you most like to see on display? So here are some images associated with those so that you can remember what we talked about today. And a poll is going to pop up on your screen and you can click on what you would most like to see on display. And as you vote, I'll just say thank you to all of my colleagues who participated in today's program, and to all of the people who have added to our collections over many years. It's because of people donating their family stories that we're able to tell as broad a story about Virginia's history. So we're really grateful to be able to share these with you. And I don't know, Elizabeth, do you know what the result of the poll is?
I think it is still open. So I think Haley, our tech guru, may need to close out the poll. This is our first time doing a poll on a Zoom program, so we're all learning together. Oh, there we have the results. All right, so I think that the results are also showing for our members who are on the call, but looks like we've got a nice array of options. So you can see the results on the poll here. So it looks like we have a three-way tie between the Horace Day painting, the folk art objects, and the Alonzo M. West collection. So thank you all so much for participating in that poll. We, as Andy said at the beginning, we are not guaranteeing that all these items are going to be on display immediately, but hopefully throughout time, we might be able to put all of these collections on display eventually. So we appreciate your participation. And I do want to honor everyone's time. We are at 11. So there was one question that we received throughout the program, and it was for Elizabeth Klosinski's donation of the Tiki torch. There was a question as to whether or not there would be an oral history that Curator Elizabeth would record to go with the physical object of the Tiki torch, and Elizabeth did confirm that she has already given a personal account to go with that Tiki torch. A nice tie-in to what Andy was saying, that the physical collection artifacts are, of course, the backbone of any collection, but it's so much more powerful when we can have that personal account to go along with the physical object. Just really makes the story richer. We will send a recording of this program to everyone on the call, and that will be an opportunity. If you have more questions that come up, you can always respond to that email, and our curators would be happy to answer your questions. And again, because we are at time, I will just do a quick plug. We've got lots of upcoming member events. Go to our website, virginiahistory.org, and you can see the full listing. We hope to see you again in person or virtually. And as always, thank you so much for joining us for this virtual curator conversation. And we very much look forward to seeing you at the next one. And very happy holidays to all of you. Take care.